Welcome to The Book of Life, a show about Jewish books, music, film, and web. I'm Heidi Estrin. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida. Additional support comes from the Association of Jewish Libraries. Debra Winegarten is the author of a book of poetry called There's Jews in Texas? Josh Parshall is the oral historian at the Goldring-Wildenberg Institute of Southern Jewish Life. Because of the interesting overlap in their interests, I brought them together for a joint interview at the 2013 Association of Jewish Libraries Conference in Houston, Texas. I am here at the Association of Jewish Libraries 2013 conference in Houston, Texas, and I'm happy to be sitting with two people, with Debra Winegarten, the author of There's Jews in Texas, and also with Josh Parshall, who is what is your role?
The oral historian.
The oral historian at the Goldring-Wildenberg Institute of Southern Jewish Life. That's a mouthful. So I thought it would be fun to talk to both of you together because you have sort of overlapping areas of interest. Let me start with you, Debra, and tell us a little bit about your book.
My book won the 2012 Poetica Publishing Magazine National Chapbook Contest. Most people don't know the origin of a chapbook, but a chapbook is a small monograph, usually about 20 to 30 pages maximum. And it was started not as a chapter book, but by chapmen. These are people, mostly peddlers living in London, who sold small monographs and small articles. So that's the origin of the chapbook. So part of the prize was to have my book published, and I've spent the last year traveling all around Texas talking about the topics and themes of my book and what it's like to be Jewish in Texas.
Not having had the chance to read it myself, is it about contemporary Jewish life in Texas or the history of Jews in Texas? What's the angle?
The angle starts off with what it's like to grow up being Jewish in Texas in the 1960s. Would you like to hear a quick poem?
Okay.
This will give you a little flavor of the book. The first poem is called Second Grade, Part 1. In far north Dallas in the early 1960s at Thomas C. Gooch Elementary School, we sat in rows alphabetically by last name, Mark Washington in front of Debra Winegarten. And our locker assignment came in that order too. So when the only Jew, me, was assigned a locker with the only Negro, him, I naturally thought they were putting the Negro and the Jew together because we had to look out for one another. And I've been trying to do that ever since.
I like that. Good. So this is a series of poems within this chapbook.
Exactly. It's a series of poems. It talks about the experience of being Jewish in Dallas, Texas in the mid-1960s. And then it flips a little bit later and it talks about my experiences as I work through the death of my beloved mother. So there's stories in there about her influence on me. I'll just read you a quick one. This is called Permission Slip 1966. In case of an atomic bomb dropping on downtown Dallas, A, keep my child at school and I will pick him up in my car. B, keep my child at school until the attack is over. C, let my child walk home. Ridiculous, my mother declared, tearing the note in tiny pieces. In case of an atomic attack, we will all be dead. I told my third grade teacher I lost the note.
That was a real permission slip. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to give Josh a chance to chime in. So the interesting contrast that's occurring to me is that you have created a resource that is a very specific snapshot of your own personal Jewish experience in Texas. And what you are in charge of is something much more general about the Jewish experience in the broader South. So it's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Can you talk about it?
Well, yes and no. When I do oral history research, which is my position is as the oral historian, in some ways what I'm doing is getting life histories that inform poems like that. And so those are very specific and very personal. And to me, the power of those is in the uniqueness of each individual story and that very individual experience. But oftentimes what we use those oral histories for is to accompany articles on our online encyclopedia of Southern Jewish communities. And that's a resource from the Institute of Southern Jewish Life, the ISJL, that's available through isjl.org. And what that is a series of articles organized geographically that provide histories of individual communities. So again, this isn't an overview or survey of Jewish life around the South, but it's short but still substantial articles that describe the progression of Jewish life in an individual place. So if you go to the encyclopedia section of isjl.org, you get a map of the South and you click on a state. In each state, you get a list of cities. Now, Texas, where we are right now, is a little different. When you click on Texas, it's subdivided into 4 regions to make it more manageable, but you can click on a city and then you get that history. So in that sense, you get the story of the whole community, which at times is the story of individuals. At times it focuses in on particular people. But really the thing there is to let people know the basics. When a cemetery was started, when a congregation was actually formed, when the synagogue was built, who helped build it, and what kind of reception that synagogue had in the city. One of the really amazing things that you see over and over is not only do you see non-Jews celebrating the formation of the synagogue, but you see non-Jews in some cases pitching in and helping fund the congregation. You see local Christian clergy speaking at the synagogue dedications. And you see the mayors coming and you see parades and all this pomp and circumstance you would get out of the dedication of a church or another public institution. So yeah, we really work to document the whole community, but there's always a wonderful intersection between that whole community and those individual stories that inform it.
You really are both involved in a very synergistic, if that's the right word, thing going on here. This is a free resource. The oral histories are online as well as the encyclopedia, or not?
The oral histories are only available in short excerpts. I think it's about 20 oral history clips that are on the website embedded in different pages. So if you go to Beaumont, Texas, I think Laredo has a video there. You can see 2 separate videos on Wharton, Texas, which is just to the southwest of us here in Houston. And there's some nice videos in Brenham, Texas. Those are just the Texas ones. There's also videos in Oklahoma, histories. There's a video or 2 in Arkansas and some other places that you'll see. But the oral histories are just there as short excerpts that are embedded, but it's all free to anybody who wants to browse there. Yeah.
And if people are interested in oral histories and they want more than what's on the website, are they welcome to contact you?
We have about 800 histories in our collection. If someone is interested in our oral history collection, they can contact me or my supervisor, Stuart Rockoff, and one of us can help them find what they're looking for. And then, generally speaking, we can hopefully make a DVD or a CD of the oral history. That's a little bit more difficult with some of our older materials. We just have to have the right equipment to make a good digital copy of it. And there tends to be kind of a backlog on that. But yeah, if someone's interested in part of our collection or wants to know more about our collection, they can just contact us. And isjl.org is the place to go for that.
It's there for researchers.
Primarily it's there for research. Though we do get inquiry from family. Nothing makes me happier than being able to share a grandparent story, say, with a grandchild, especially if it's a family that didn't know it was there. It's an amazing thing to find a resource that you never knew was there and to get stories that maybe had been lost.
Earlier in this conference, we heard from Dr. Brian Stone, a Texas historian, and he spoke about this widespread idea that Texas Jews are unique, and that this turned out to kind of be a myth, that Texas Jews are really very much like Jews across America, but there's this ongoing myth that it's Texas, we've got to be different, there's got to be something special about us. So you guys are part of the same field that he's in. Is this a myth you knew about? Do you consider it a myth? What do you think about that?
Well, being a third-generation Texan, I knew, of course, we were unique and special. And I think it plays into the whole persona about Texas, because in Texas, things are larger than life. And things tend to be exaggerated because we're so big. Of course, you go to Alaska, they laugh at us. They're like, no, you can fit 3 Texases in Alaska. But putting that aside, I think that we're taught that we're unique.
So, Josh, what do you think about Texas Jewish uniqueness?
There's a major debate among Southern Jewish historians about the uniqueness of the Jewish experience in the South. One of the big things people say is that what matters is not so much where your community is located, but the size of your community. A very small Jewish community in Iowa might actually have a lot in common with a small Jewish community in Arkansas. Perhaps more than that Jewish community in Arkansas has in common with the Dallas Jewish community. So I think there's a lot to be said about the experience of Jews in smaller rural places having more in common than, say, Jews in different sized towns and cities in the same region. That being said, there are a few things that make the South unique, the level of religiosity of Christian neighbors, and the trend of kind of Zionist philo-Semitism that you see in the South is something that exists elsewhere, but more so here probably. And obviously the history with civil rights and slavery is a unique context in some ways. The South doesn't have a monopoly on that particular type of evil that is segregation and that is discrimination, but it happened in a different way here for a variety of reasons. So in terms of interacting with those particular histories, the Jews here did have perhaps a unique experience. You see a lot of Jews in retail, especially in the South and in small towns and in Texas. They had very public faces. They had a lot of interaction with the community, and because of that, there was a lot of impetus to be a really constructive member of the community. If you had a men's store or a shoe store, you wanted to be seen as an active and contributing member. So there was lots of extra reasons, perhaps, to be involved with a lot of things. That being said, oftentimes, that also gave you a disincentive for rocking the boat on some of these historical issues where Jews nationally like to think of ourselves as having been in the forefront.
Interesting. Thank you. So, Debra, I'm wondering, have you experienced a difference between what it was like to be Jewish when you were a child versus now in Texas?
Wow, that's an interesting question. You know, in some ways, Texas is a lot more right-wing now than it was when I was growing up. Although when I was growing up, it was also pretty right-wing. With our governor being a very outspoken evangelical Christian, it's interesting because when you are a minority, then there is the chance to express yourself more. You know, would I have written this book 20 years ago? Probably not.
Now you're saying you wrote it in response to that environment?
I think in part because I was reflecting on some of my early anti-Semitic experiences. Now, I will say that because I live in Austin, and Austin is kind of the oasis of liberalism in the middle of Texas, I don't often run up against anti-Semitic instances per se. But as I was going around the state this past year promoting my book and giving workshops on it, I heard stories about anti-Semitism. There was one that happened in a high school about 45 miles north of here. An 11th grade high school student was on the basketball team, and this guy was the only Jew in his high school. And his teammates kept calling him Pizza. And he didn't understand, and finally he asked his best friend, he's like, why are they calling me Pizza? And his best friend said, because Hitler baked Jews in ovens.
Ooh.
This happened in a small rural community with maybe 160 Jewish families in the whole county, and this was last year.
So, Josh, I wanted to get your take on the changes from the historical to the contemporary Southern Jewish experience.
The biggest thing is that what you see now is a decline of Jewish populations in small towns, but a rise in large cities. You know, the difference is now you see the communities that are thriving in the South, Jewishly, are ones where a lot of the folks aren't going to necessarily be from here. So you have Jews in the South, but the question comes up basically whether or not they are Southern. If you look at Atlanta, I mean, no one in Atlanta is from Atlanta. And that's especially true in the Jewish community. So people move to retire. People move because there's jobs. People move to the South because there's been this kind of Sun Belt boom from Houston to Atlanta into Charlotte, North Carolina, and the Research Triangle, North Carolina, all these places. You see a growth in various industries, and Jews follow those jobs, you know, the same way anybody else does. But what that changes then is people who are living in the South but aren't necessarily having that rural experience that we think of as being typically Southern.
I think you're spot on, and I think one thing that might be interesting also for your listeners is a little bit of the history of Texas Jewry. Late 1800s, early 1900s, there was something called the Galveston movement, where in New York City there were all these immigrants coming from Eastern Europe and no jobs for the Jews there. So there was a deal made where instead of going into New York City, the Jews were sent to Galveston. And Galveston Jews were lucky because there was a rabbi in Galveston, Henry Cohen, who had connections all the way up through the Midwest and into Texas and New Mexico. So he would meet the ships, he would find out who the Jews were, and if they didn't have a job, he would match them up and he would put them on a train and he would say, okay, now you're going to go open the grocery market in Nacogdoches, Texas, or Abilene. So there was kind of like an underground Jewish railroad where these immigrants were coming and they were actually sent to the cities to help populate the cities and help make Jewish communities in these cities. So that's part of the Southern Jewish experience of settling these small towns. My great-grandfather was a grocer. He would go to the farmer's market in Dallas. He would load up his wagon and he would drive over 7 bridges. Sometimes they got washed out, 7 wooden bridges. My great-aunt would count them, to Forney, Texas, which was 30 miles east of Dallas. And he couldn't afford to have his own store, so what he did was he went in an alleyway between 2 stores and he put in a floor and he put in a roof and boom, he had a store. And I've actually gone to Forney and I've talked to some of the senior citizens there. They remember him. They said, oh yes, he had this funny accent. They couldn't understand him. One time they played a joke on him and they put his horse and buggy on his roof. How they did that, I have no idea. And they remembered that he had bananas, which was something that was very foreign to them. So they loved him for his bananas. And he had candies that had liqueur in them. So they remembered that as well.
It's those little touches.
Yeah, totally.
That's neat.
I did want to say that another resource that Josh's organization has is the Do-It-Yourself Oral History Guide.
Yeah, so if you go to the history section of our website, isjl.org/history, one of the resources we offer is this Do-It-Yourself Guide, which starts off with some very detailed technical information, as well as a list of topics and a list of strategies for asking people the kind of smart, open-ended questions that are really going to solicit deep and reflective answers. You know, I'd say to people that it's a little intimidating at first time you pick up a piece of recording equipment and shove it in someone's face or set it up on a table and try to sit down with a parent or a grandparent, but that it's intensely rewarding. With a little forethought and with practice, you can make really important documents for your family or your community. Hopefully then you can work with a local archivist or a historian or a librarian to find a way to save those in a way that's going to be accessible for people, because now's the time. No matter when you're hearing this, right now is the moment to start interviewing people, because people aren't forever.
Yeah. So. That's a really great point, especially in this day and age of Facebook. And I love Facebook. Debra's helping me Facebook this conference, one of my volunteers. But that's very ephemeral. So you're absolutely right that we're producing a lot of content, but so much of it is ephemeral. So to put it in a more permanent format is very important. And I think that that is a great touchstone that you're both making me think about, the importance of preserving individual memories as a way for the entire community to benefit. Debra, are you working on anything else?
As a matter of fact, I am. I just finished a new poetry manuscript. The major complaint about There's Jews in Texas is that it's too short. So I've just finished a new manuscript staying with this same thing. It's called Where Jewish Grandmothers Come From. And I just entered it in a contest. Hopefully it again wins, but if not, I'm going to publish it anyway. And then also I just completed a manuscript on Ovida Kolpabi. She was the first director of the Women's Army Corps for World War II. She met Eisenhower when he was a general in North Africa. He loved the women soldiers because women, as it turns out, make good soldiers, because at that time we took orders well, we were patriotic. So when Eisenhower became president, he appointed her as the head of HEW. She was the second woman in the U.S. to hold a cabinet-level position. So she's big also in Texas history. I write biographies of Texas women for middle school kids. So UT Press has that book. It should be out in March of 2014.
So you focus pretty much exclusively on Texas topics?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And for people interested in keeping up with me and my adventures, my website is sociosights.com. It's SOCIOSIGHTS.
Is there anything that I haven't thought to ask that either of you would like to talk about?
I'd just like to read one more poem to close out.
Great.
This is second grade, part 2. Being 8 years old means walking alone to the Skillerns drugstore. By the way, Mr. Skillerns was Jewish. At the Park Forest Shopping Center with my weekly allowance quarter searing a hole in my already sweaty shorts pocket. I know what I'll buy. The the latest Superman or Batman comic book, whichever one came in that week and doesn't already live in my nightstand at home. With my new Superman comic slipped in the sleek paper bag, top carefully folded so my sweaty hands don't ruin my treasure, a grown man stops me on the sidewalk, eyeing my Star of David necklace and asking if I'm Jewish. When I nod yes, I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, he tells me, "That's really too bad for me because didn't I know that Jews burn in hell when they die?" Tears falling so hard I could barely see, I dropped my weekly treasure and ran home to Mom so fast, I thought I might keel over before I got to her and be snatched right down to hell. When I told Mom what happened, she put both hands on my shoulders, knelt to my height where she looked square in my eyes, and in that Dallas drawl of hers said, "That's okay, honey, don't worry. We're Jewish. We don't believe in hell."
Very good. Well, thank you so much to both of you. What an interesting conversation.
It's been great visiting with you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. There are so many ways to connect with the Book of Life. Fan us at facebook.com/Book of Life Podcast. Follow us at twitter.com/Book of Life Pod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. You can also listen to the latest episode by phone at 916-313-3820. And of course, find links to everything at bookoflifepodcast.com. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band at freilachmakers.com. Thanks for listening and happy reading.